Good morning. My name is Richard Smith. I'm one of the deacons here at Kenton Baptist Church, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our service today. There's a walk near our home, a circular walk that my wife and I do pretty regularly. It's about 3 miles and takes you across some lovely countryside. But just occasionally, we do it the opposite way round to our normal practice. And it's surprising the different things that you see as you do a walk in the opposite direction. And I felt that way a little about the message that I want to bring this morning, which is about Sarah and the lessons in faith that we can learn from Sarah's experience. We're used to thinking of her husband Abraham as a man of faith. But Sarah can often get missed out, and yet in that great chapter which lists heroes of the faith in the Bible, we find these words: by faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Now, Sarah was Abraham's half-sister. Their dad, Terah, and they all lived in Ur, which is a city in what would now be the southern part of Iraq, not far from the Persian Gulf. And Terah decided on a migration of the whole clan to Canaan. We don't know why, but he did. And the direct route to Canaan was 650 miles or thereabouts due west. The problem was desert. So migrating with herds and flocks and family meant a much longer journey. So they made the 700-800 mile journey north up the Euphrates River until they came across modern-day Iraq and Syria into modern-day Turkey, and so they settled there at a place called Haran. And there Terah died. He never completed the journey. But after his death, God appeared to Abraham and said, Abraham, I'm going to give you a great number of children and descendants, that you will become a great nation. And I'm sure there was great excitement in the house as he shared this with Sarah, but there was a sting in the tail, which was you complete the journey to Canaan, another 500 miles or so south. But they agreed, and on they went on this journey. Sarah bore no children, which in her culture was both a sadness and a source of shame. In that day, women were treated principally as units of production of food, of clothes, and of babies. And Sarah was unable to provide Abraham with a son. But nevertheless, she and Abraham seem to have been blessed with a strong and devoted marriage. They were in this together, even in a very patriarchal society. So I want to look at 3 questions. I want to consider how Sarah's faith developed, how it showed, and what happened when she got it wrong. Now, in terms of the development of Sarah's faith, how did she learn to consider him faithful who had promised? And my answer is that it came from journeying with Abraham and following God's promise to them both. On the journey south, she was fulfilling her daily calling with the family and the flocks and the herds, and even honoured her calling at personal risk to herself when in Egypt, and later with a local warlord called Abimelech, where she was put into their harem as a beautiful woman. But God protected her from danger there. Now, what I want to notice is that much of Sarah's development of trust in God came from dealing with the daily stuff. Her daily calling was a kind of spiritual gym in which she could learn to trust God, even in the scary bits. And we find these words written in the first letter of Peter. Let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children, if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Now, I'm not supporting the patriarchy in which Sarah lived, but what I want you to notice is that she had to live the hand that God had dealt her and to learn to trust God in that setting. And the same is true for you and for me. We have to learn to trust God in our daily walk. We have to trust it in the way that we deal with that difficult customer, with that colleague that we find attractive, in the way that we deal with that neighbour who parks in an inconvenient way. All those questions that we live, we have to learn trusting God and to leave our future in his hands, as Sarah did. But that verse also said that we could be a blessing. And it occurred to me to wonder, in what ways are there that we can be a blessing? And it occurred to me, just in the present circumstances, picking up shopping for a neighbour is a way to be a real blessing. Having spiritual insights, praying for the colleagues and for the people that we serve. Maybe simply speaking up for Jesus. Sarah clearly believes God's promises to Abraham, not only because she travels as part of his household further south, but when God then appears again to Abraham and says, "You will have your own children," Sarah takes that seriously too. In fact, she arranges a surrogacy, believing herself barren. She arranges for Abraham to have a child by her maidservant. And that makes me wonder what promises of God I need to take more seriously. Are there things that I have sensed God saying to me down the years that I have let drift? It seems that Sarah took very seriously what God said, even at personal cost to her. Now, Sarah knew that she was past childbearing and decided to give God a helping hand, and that came at personal cost, I'm certain. And she regrets it when her plan succeeds, and she behaves vengefully to her maidservant Hagar, and actually to Abraham too. But later she allows Hagar and Ishmael back into the household, accepting the consequences of her choices and trusting God to work it out. I wonder, when we've made choices and we don't like the outcomes, whether our heart is to try and change things or whether we are prepared to trust God to work it out. And later, Sarah found herself hearing the voice of God speaking to Abraham as three mysterious visitors came to their tent. And this time the words were specific. "It will be your child, Abraham, by Sarah, despite the fact that you're 100 and she's 90 and well past the age of bearing children." And Sarah, listening behind the tent door, laughs to herself inwardly. Was that doubt? Was that incredulity? Was that joy? At the beginning of that chapter in the book of Hebrews, we find the words that say, "Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." Now, things hoped for is clearly prospective. It's about the future. But the conviction of things not seen can be about how we interpret the present or even the past. Do I see this healing as a gift of modern medicine, or as a gift from God, which may or may not use modern medicine? Faith is a choice about how I see the events of my life. I noticed too that Sarah had another danger, which was assessing the reality of her situation. I put reality in inverted commas, for herself. We need to learn to trust God for timing and means and resources, as well as for the end result of a promise that he makes to us. At our own church, we're considering hard the direction of our ministry and how we should move forward. There are concerns about how we can resource the future ministry with people, because there are a number of older folk in our congregation. But in the end, we need to seek God for his purpose in our ministry, and then to look for him for the means and the timing and the resources. There's a lovely verse in Proverbs, which I've quoted on other occasions in our church. It says this: "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight." I love the way that Good News Bible translates the second phrase in that. It says, "Do not rely on what you think you know." Something I often have to remind myself. So we've thought about how Sarah's faith developed. We've thought about how it showed in her faithfulness to God, and about some times where maybe she got it wrong. But that leads me to one final question. Is faith really about me, or is it about God? In one of Paul's letters to the Ephesians, chapter 2, verse 8, he says, "By grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God." Now, we're used to thinking of grace as a gift from God. But I think also here, Paul is saying that faith is a gift from God. It's something that God places in us by his Holy Spirit, and he teaches us and grows our faith. God wasn't disturbed by Sarah's laughter on hearing that at 90 years old she was going to become a mum. In fact, God's words to Abraham were, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" That's a good verse to remember. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Now, we can cooperate with God. Faith, it says in Romans, comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. So one thing we can do to grow our faith is to soak in the Bible, however it works for you, through journaling, through art, through memorizing it, through articulating it, through speaking it. Another way we can grow our faith is to start where you are with the tasks that God has given you and to involve God in them. I came across a lovely story about a retired school teacher called Tim, who still did some locum work in schools. And his practice, as the children were working on whatever that he'd set them to do, was that as he walked around the class looking over their work, he would pray for each child by name. And there came a day when he heard God say to him in his heart, "You know, nobody has ever mentioned that boy's name to me before." And I found that a real challenge to faith. How do I pray for colleagues? Do I pray for them by name? I wonder how many of them have never been mentioned before God by name before. And another way to grow your faith is not to dismiss too quickly the little ideas that come into your mind. I remember not long before Liz and I left Grimsby, Liz had a difficult relationship with a particular neighbour, and she had this sense that she should give this neighbour a Bible, and she struggled with it for some time. But there came a day where, with great hesitation, she took as a gift a Bible to this woman. And there was a really warm reception. We don't know the outcome of that. I'd love to say the woman had read the Bible and come to faith in Christ. I can't. But I am sure that Liz did the right thing in following that little prompting in her heart. And the outcome of Sarah's faith. In Genesis chapter 1, verses 5 to 7, it says, "Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, 'God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me.' And she said, 'Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would bear children? Yet I've borne him a son in his old age.' So by faith, Sarah received power to conceive even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised." And the sting in the tail of this story is that it's from Abraham and Sarah that God's salvation plan for you and for me, for the whole of mankind, was worked out. Sarah's faith was instrumental in bringing salvation to all of us, because Jesus stands in the line of Abraham and Sarah, and through his death and resurrection he brings life and hope to each of us. May God bless you this week as you serve him